everyone. This is Diane Rasmussen with UK Column. I'm really happy to be here today talking with Steve James. He uses social media as Edge of the Matrix, and he is available on YouTube, X, and TikTok under that name. And links to his social media channels will be provided in the write-up for this interview as it goes out. So Steve, again, thanks for joining me today. It's really great for us to be able to sit down and have a chat. I've been admiring your work for a while. I think the first time I became really aware of you was when you attended the UK Column live event in Cheltenham. I think that was back in April. And I remember you interviewed me about the work that I had been doing and lost my academic and my librarian career over calling out gender ideology in children's books. And I remember we had a short but quite enthusiastic conversation when you were like, I'm going to go out and do more about this because this is really shocking. So I know you had a channel before that, but your views and your followers have really exploded in recent months. So I guess I'm interested to hear from you kind of how you got to this point where you are now from where you were even just a few months ago. And how that, I'm also curious, I'm hopeful that what you did with us at UK Column back in Cheltenham and then in York just last month maybe helped you get yourself going a bit more. So if you maybe want to take us through your journey of where you are now.
When we chatted in Cheltenham, I spent 3 months planning going out and doing a campaign on the streets. So in fact, Sue and I, my wife, have been abroad in Panama, and we landed in not Heathrow Airport. What was the other airport in London? Next second biggest, Gatwick Airport. Yeah. And we literally come from the airport after being away for 3 months directly to the conference in Cheltenham. So we were fresh off our travels, but all the time while I was on my travels, I was planning what I was going to do. And basically, I'm not original in this. I took the concept from Chris Elston, who's known as Billboard Chris online, and he's from Canada, and he's been doing this campaign now for, I think, at least 5 years. So he's the original guy, and I reached out to him. I said, I like what you do. I'm going to do the same in the UK. Have you got any advice? And he gave me 4 good pieces of advice. The first one was remain calm. The second one was know your stuff. The third one was film everything. And then the fourth one was let them speak. And it's been like Operation Let Them Speak. If you let them talk, they're going to literally expose themselves and their ideology as a falsehood. Or something that anybody of sound mind would stand back and look and think, you're talking nonsense. Yeah, so I was a little bit, I don't know, wet behind the ears, a little bit green towards it, you know. I didn't know what I would actually come across, and I was kind of taken aback at the amount of people, particularly young people, that have been brainwashed with this ideology, and how angry and ferocious that they will get if you challenge that ideology. And that was something that, although I'd seen it a little bit with Chris Elston, Billboard Chris, out on the streets of Canada, I didn't think it'd be as bad. Naively, that's why I say I was a little bit taken aback about it, you know. But after being out on the streets for a while, you can spot the types of people that are going to take umbrage with my presence and my message. And the message is pretty clear that this ideology, it's a danger to society, it's a danger to kids, and it's a danger to children. It's a war on the truth, it's a war on reality, and it's a war on freedom of speech. And that gets demonstrated every time I go out because they try and shut me down.
Right.
So no. Yeah, it's been quite a journey, Diane, and it's taken me up and down the country as well. Mm-hmm. I've gone from, in fact, when I say up and down the country, I haven't quite made it to Scotland yet. The furthest north I've made is York, which was, I went out on the streets when I was at the conference, and also Newcastle. I've been up to Newcastle, and I've been as far down and into the belly of the beast, which is Brighton, and that was quite interesting too.
That I'm sure I did see some of your coverage from Brighton. It is interesting, although we see the same thing in cities, across the country, as you've said. It is interesting to also see some of the regional differences as well, even though obviously it's a international agenda, right? It's not just here in the UK or just in Canada, but it's.
Yeah, I mean, my wife Sue and I have travelled abroad, and we just come back from the GenSpec conference. GenSpec is genspec.org. They're an organisation of psychotherapists, academics that are looking for a non-medicalised approach to young people with gender identity disorder, which has now been coined as gender dysphoria by the activists. But we saw the same people with the same ideology in New Mexico, in the United States, and we've seen it in other European countries as well. We've travelled through Europe. It's the same people with the same ideology. They've taken, this is nothing new. They've taken the playbook from Mao's Red Guards, from the Hitler Youth, from Pol Pot's Khmer Rouge. What you do is you radicalize the young people with an ideology and then set them free to deconstruct society or construct it in the way that you want it. And that's what they've done. This ideology is based from postmodernism and critical theory and queer theory. And it's all about taking everything that we know in society and deconstructing it, turning it on its head, and use academic word salads to just bring their ideology, into the mainstream. So that they say things like, trans. This is their mantra. They'll say trans women are women, and the language is very confusing as well to the everyday people, because somebody from the general public that have not come across this, if you say a trans woman, they'll be thinking, oh yes, that's a woman. But a trans woman is a biological man. But the ideology says that a trans woman is a woman. Okay, and so one of my signs says trans women are men. So I'm directly challenging it because trans women are men. It used to say biological men, but I've taken that away because we're using their language. There's men and women. All right, the differences is rooted in biology, but we don't have to make a distinction, because if I say biological men, what they will do, they'll say, well, there's a difference between biology and then a social construct, which is gender. So sex is rooted in biology, and they tell us now gender is not synonymous with sex. It is something different. It's a social construct. So under that ideology, a man can become a woman because being a woman is his gender, and that's constructed socially. Do you get where I'm coming from? So what they've done is they've taken gender and they've pushed that ahead of biological sex. So gender is that person's lived experience, and that person's something that's innate within them, they'll tell you, and that trumps the laws of the universe, that trumps biology, that trumps objective truth, because that's that person's lived experience.
Right. Yeah. It's very difficult to get your head around it at first. And, I've been doing quite a bit of interviewing and reporting about this for UK Column for a while. One of the interesting conversations I've had about this, and I've talked to several people and interviewed several people from different perspectives on this issue. One of them is a lady in Scotland, Dr. Jenny Cunningham, who's a retired consultant pediatrician. And one of the things that made a lot of sense to me when she said this, when I interviewed her, is that this diagnosis of gender dysphoria is basically the only sort of mental or psychological condition in the NHS that is then said to have necessarily be treated with a physical procedure. So that if you're saying in your mind, well, I think I'm a woman, then you therefore proceed to chop off certain bits that only men have, and then you wake up and then you're a woman. Well, we know in reality it doesn't work that way, but that's the story that they're being sold in childhood and, and into adulthood as well, as you know. But I think it's an interesting way of when I tried to explain it to people, and they were like, oh yeah, that's actually true. Like, you would not, nowadays we don't do lobotomies anymore. We don't treat depression or, any other sort of mental illness with that physical, well, let's go in and change your brain or take out the frontal lobe or something and you'll feel better. But it is a very similar thing to me when you compare, you're thinking this, and so we'll do this to your body and then it will be better. And that's not really what it seems to work at all, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously a bit top down. It's a top down ideology. It's not grassroots whatsoever. It's being pushed on us, and it's been pushed, I believe, to deconstruct society so they can bring order out of the chaos. But also it's being pushed by the medical industrial complex. I can't get definitive figures, but I did come across one which seemed fairly reasonable, that each person that identifies as trans is worth $1.5 million to the pharmaceutical industry over their lifetime. So, wow. If you can get them young, you start off with the puberty blockers for a young child. I'll talk about that a little bit later. I'll just do the medical costs first, but I'll talk about the gender identity disorder amongst young people and how that's grown. But if we're just purely talking financially, so that young child, they'll go on puberty blockers initially, but what the real name for that is hormone blockers. They stop a child developing into an adult, because what they say is that they will develop secondary sexual characteristics, breasts or facial hair or whatever, and that will cause them distress. So there's the initial cost to there's the initial profits to the pharmaceutical industry for that. And then virtually every single child, apart from a few dropouts, for whatever reason, goes on to taking opposite sex hormones, right? And they will be on those for life as long as they continue this delusion. So that's testosterone for girls or estrogen for men. And then so that's a massive cost. You've got a customer for life all the way through. But there's also complications and what this does to the body as well. So a lot of the females, they have to have hysterectomies, and there's many different, so everything's taken out. If they're going to have the other surgeries, euphemistically they call it top surgery, where they remove the girl's breast, so that's a double mastectomy. If they want to go down the next level for females, which is called bottom surgery, they call that a phalloplasty, and what they do is they take a slither of flesh, not a sliver, it's a big chunk of flesh all the way off the forearm, and they create a fake penis, and then they sew it on down below. And I've seen these pictures, and it looks nothing like a penis, and it's full of fat, and if the person gets fat, this fake penis gets fatter with it, and they look like a thick can of Coke, basically. That's the physical size of it, but it's just a piece of flesh that's hanging there. If they want to make it erect, what they do is they put a pump in. So they have another surgery and they put a pump, and they have a pump, one of the testicles. So they have prosthetic testicles, and one of the pumps it up, and then there's a valve to release it. It's absolute. I've seen pictures, and I've seen videos of the surgery. And I think if the general public saw this, it would end tomorrow.
It's barbaric to me, and also and I'm not sure how much of this is real, but some of the social media posts that I've seen about males who want to be female is actually saying, well, I'm now a woman, and so therefore I'm about to start my cycle. I'm going to have a period. I've got cramps. Like, no, that's not what you have. And It's so delusional to be able to think that this is what is actually happening to you, because even if you created something that even looks similar, even slightly similar, even though it doesn't, to looking like the other sex with your genitals, that doesn't mean that they're going to operate, whether it's, ejaculating for a man or having a period for a woman. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah,
and
it's
I'm not
never
sure
going to
how
happen.
they're being sold us, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a mental illness. They're mentally ill people. So it's called a phalloplasty for a female, the bottom surgery. For a man, it's called a vaginoplasty. Basically, they castrate them, they cut off the penis, they turn it inside out and create a cavity, and it's just an open wound which has to then be dilated for life, else it will close up. The famous case is that of Jazz Jennings, the young boy in America. They did a whole series on him called I Am Jazz. As a young teenager, he had a bye-bye penis party, and all the adults were there celebrating. They had a cake in the shape of a penis, and they're clapping. So Jazz Jennings, I can't remember, there was obviously complications to the surgery, because there always is, or pretty much always is, and he can't urinate properly. He urinates horizontally, not down. So he's had subsequent surgeries, and I don't even think it's corrected now. He's put on a massive amount of weight. You can see it's a completely unhappy young man, and most of this was pushed by his mother, which is, it's the case. I mean, I didn't coin this term, but about Munchausen's by proxy, about so where the carer gets all the attention for looking after somebody. So they've coined this frame called Transhausen by proxy, and there's all these mothers that, so if they wanted a girl, they've got a young boy, and they convince that young boy that they're a girl, and that's the phrase, Transhausen by proxy. They're support groups for all these parents with trans children. One of them's called Mama Bears, another one's called Mama Dragons, and they all go on there, and their social status is uplifted because they've got this trans child that everyone wants to talk about. It's awful.
Right. So it's even hard to know what to say. But so by the time you were looking into this, and by the time you got to Cheltenham in April, and then you interviewed me about the work I've been doing in the libraries and schools, and my story of how I sort of lost my academic career and my sort of ability to be a librarian officially any longer, although I will still remain a librarian as long as I live, and I will always say that. They're not taking that away from me. So where were you by the time you got to Cheltenham in April and you talked to me, and you'd been to this conference just before that with Sue? So what had you learned up until that point, and what made you decide to ask me about the work that I'd been doing? So this is going back about 6 or 7 months now.
Well, what I'd focused on up till that point really is what really piqued my interest was mediocre males identifying as females and competing in female sports. So I was looking into that because I've always enjoyed sports. I know how hard it is to train, to focus your whole life on something and enter a competition. You know, I've had victories and I've had losses, and you know, the victories are fantastic and the losses really hurt. And I thought, it's the same for females. You know, they're competing against other females, they're putting everything into it, and then I thought, can I imagine how they would feel if a man was to just step into that arena, like the guy that calls himself Will Thomas. He was called Will Thomas. He then called himself Leah Thomas, and he was something like 400th in the United States. You know, on the I can't remember what organisation it was. It might have been like a collegiate level. He was number 400, and then all of a sudden he's number 1. He beat Riley Gaines and he's winning all the medals. So I was quite aware of that, being a sportsman, but also I was working in the fire service, and they changed the appearance policy in the fire service, and rather than what it read before was that you had to just turn up. You couldn't have a beard in the fire service because you had to wear a breathing apparatus. It used to be look smart, you know, be clean shaven, polish your boots, iron all your uniform and look smart. That was the appearance policy. A lot of academics come in and took managerial positions in the human resources department, and they wrote the new appearance policy. And it started off saying, if you turn up at work, you can identify as whatever sex you want, and then you'll be able to use the appropriate facilities for that. And I'm like, what? This is crazy. I don't know if they use the term sex or gender. I can't remember. But it was crazy. It was so crazy. Nobody took any notice of it. But I was like, I kind of did. And I thought, this really isn't right. So I had knowledge that there was some kind of institutional push coming from above that was trying to dictate our kind of like social norms and values. You could see that. So to kind of answer your question, I knew it was in the institutions, and I knew that it was in sports, and I did a lot of research on the sports aspect because that's what kind of triggered me more than anything. But it was only really since after I met you at Cheltenham and I went on the streets and then realised how many radical young people were believing that men could be women. There were young, in inverted commas, trans people coming up. One of the signs says there's no such thing as a transgender child, and they were coming up saying, I'm a trans child. And I'm like, well, you look like a girl to me because you are a girl, and you look like a bloke to me. The younger ones were the girls, the older ones were the males, basically. And we can go into why that is coming up. But my knowledge base wasn't that good, but I've done a massive amount of research since first going out on the street because I didn't have the best arguments to be able to counter the points other than basic reality that a man's a man and a woman's a woman. But I've learned so much now about how this ideology has spread between different demographics of people and how it's affected so many people as well. So I see the younger people, the younger boys and girls, but predominantly girls, as victims of this ideology. These are the ones they're identifying as trans because a lot of them have autism, a lot of them have other different traumas in their lives, different traumatic comorbidities. There may have been, a lot of these girls have been sexually assaulted, and all of a sudden they're going through puberty and they're getting attention off males and they don't want that. The older guys you get, and these are predominantly the problem, these are the middle-aged men, but you're getting younger men as well in the 20s doing this, or identifying as being trans, and they're purely doing it from my perspective. I believe that it's purely from a fetishistic sexual arousal point of view. There's a condition called autogynephilia where men get a sexual kick or sexual arousal by imagining themselves becoming a woman. So you've got these, and it's predominantly, you know, driven by these type of men. I know it's coming from above, you know, they want to change society, but these are misogynistic men. So I've now come across a whole group of women, feminists, fighting this. You know, they call it, they've taken back this word TERF, trans exclusionary radical feminists, right? And I've met loads of these women. They're fantastic. And they've been coming up to me in the street saying, thank you for doing what you're doing. But I didn't realise how much this agenda had impacted them as well. So you've got women that are, these women that are victims of this because you've got these predatory males coming into female spaces. And so it's a completely misogynistic agenda from their level. And I've spoken to some of these on the streets. They get very angry with me and they shout at me quite a lot. I actually spoke to one down in London, probably the most notorious trans rights activist, probably in the UK. He used to be called Alan, I think it was Alan Baker. He now goes by the name of Sarah Jane Baker. He did. He told me all this. I knew this anyway, but he'll just spurt it out and told me all this. He did 30 years in prison for kidnap and torture of a teenage boy because his dad told him to do it, apparently. When he was in prison, he identified as a female, but they wouldn't allow him the surgery. So he managed to come across a razor blade, and he castrated himself with the razor blade whilst he was in prison. And then he ate his own testicles so they wouldn't sew them back on. And he told me this. So, you know, if Alan Baker, Sarah Jane Baker isn't mentally ill, I don't know who is. He also said to me, he was actually willing to talk to me without getting angry, actually. I had one of the better chats with him, you know, and it was quite a pleasant, you know, exchange from the perspective that we weren't shouting each other down. I was letting him speak. But he did say, he said now he's found Jesus Christ, but he said if he'd have met me 10 years ago, he'd have buried me in a hole in Scotland. He said, that was his words.
Wow.
I said to her, do I need to be worried? And he said, oh, no, like I've found Jesus Christ now, you're okay.
Wow, I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, obviously, when you're outspoken on this agenda, you're going to be attacked, and I'm going to be attacked by the men that identify as women. Okay, some of the women shout at me on the street. Some of these young, predominantly middle class university students that have been fed up a head full of nonsense by the professors doing critical theory, postmodern theory, queer theory in university. They might shout at me on the streets, but the ones that, you know, that come after me online, they're predominantly these fetishistic, autogynephilic men, because I'm a threat to their delusion and their ideology.
Right. You know, I don't do anything that requires changing rooms personally, but there was one time, I believe it was last year, I was in a library and I was going in to use the women's loos, and there was a man in a dress walking out as I was walking in. And I felt really uncomfortable for days, actually, because he looked at me like I was the one with the problem. I didn't even say anything other than I might have looked at him in a little bit of shock, like, why are you coming out of there? And I didn't speak. But I just felt this anger, and I felt intimidated for days. Well, after I left the library, it didn't leave my mind for a while. So
yeah, absolutely. And there's a case. Sorry,
yeah.
go on.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, there's been an incident in Gold's Gym in the United States. I can't remember which actual state. I think it was Florida. And this woman had just had enough. This one was a lesbian, this big, kind of like muscular black woman that had just had enough. And this bloke was wandering into the changing room, and she made a big scene, screaming and shouting about it. She's called Tish somebody. And she's the one that's been banned from the gym, not this man. Now, a lot of people have done digging on this man. I can't remember his name. I posted about it on my X channel, Edge of the Matrix, so people can check it out there. But it turns out, like a lot of these cases, this man's got a criminal record, you know, and it's normally down to sex offences. I think it's a sex offence criminal record. A lot of these men that dress like this, you know, there's a massive overrepresentation of trans-identifying men, what they would call trans women, in prison who are in for sexual offences. 60% of the men identifying as women, 60% of the prisoners are in for sexual offences. Compare that to the population of normal men, normal men that don't identify as women, and it's 17.9%. Women as sex offenders, it's 3%. But I'm sure some of those women are probably men identifying as women, because you've got male prisoners in women's prisons still.
Right, and that was one of the cases I wanted to mention to you. What do you know about? I'm sure you know about the Isla Bryson case in Scotland.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yes.
If you want to talk about that, just in case viewers have not heard about this case, it was, I think, part of Nicola Sturgeon's downfall, but maybe not all of it. But
yeah,
I think...
yeah. So Isla Bryson was originally put in the. His name was Adam Graham, and he was I did look this up. I can't remember off the top of my head, but he was in for sex offences as well. I'm not quite sure if it was rape or sex offences against minors. I'm not sure, but it's easy. You can easily look up. I've got a head full of so much stuff that you tend to forget. But he was Adam Graham, and he was initially he identified as female, and soon as he was, knew he was going to be convicted, and he got put into prison, there was a massive public outcry, and he was taken out of that. There's another case of someone called Karen White. His real name was Stephen Wood. Okay, he was another sex offender. Once he was in prison, he identified as Karen White. When he was in prison, he sexually assaulted two female prisoners, and that then went to a court case. And because at the time the judges were still following the bench guidebook, which said that you have to refer to somebody by the gender which they wish to be recognised as, the court can't get my words out. The reading from the courts said that he assaulted her with her penis. The conscripts of the court. So he assaulted her with her penis. So that was that one. There's been another case of, do you know, in Ireland, a young man who calls himself Barbie Kardashian. He's just come out of Limerick prison. He was in Limerick's women's prison for a time, and then eventually got moved into a male prison because he was threatening to rape the prisoners and the prison guards with a broom handle. Because he said, I have nothing else to, because I'm now a woman, the only thing I can rape them with is an object, although he's still fully intact in the genitalia area. So that's another one to check out. There are more. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but there are many, many more.
Well, and I believe one that's going on right now, I believe is a intact male, is that the way to say it, is the Darlington Nurses Tribunal, which is going on currently, which I know I'd like to talk a little bit about that, because I know you and Kelly J. Keane were there. So if you want to maybe, I covered this on UK Column News earlier this week, actually, at the time of recording. So this is would be the 3rd of November, if anyone wants to go back and look at my report about the Darlington Nurses. But maybe if you want to just tell the audience a little bit about it and about your experiences when you were there at the tribunal.
Yeah, so I travelled up to Newcastle, because that's where the tribunal court is being heard, although the hospital was in Darlington. Right. And I got there early on the first day, and I saw the nurses coming in, and I think there's 7 or 8 of them. I think 7.
It's 8 actually. Yeah.
Is it 8?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and they were giving evidence, so they all turned up. There was a bit of a media fanfare, and I got to speak to them. Really great nurses, and the case was with another nurse who calls himself Rose Henderson, and he used to. He used to go into the women's. He identified as a female, go into the female changing rooms, and it went on for quite a long time until the women had enough. But all of a sudden, on the female locker room or changing room, there was a sign which said, "This is now an inclusive space for everybody." Now, that only appeared on the female changing room door. It didn't appear on the male changing room door. So this guy who calls himself Rose Henderson, who quite frankly looks like Buffalo Bill out of Silence of the Lambs, you know, with that long hair, and he's got this receding, just does not look like a woman.
Yeah.
Other than the fact that he's got long hair, but he just looks like a fat man with long hair, basically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, the nurses had enough, and the nurses are actually taking the Darlington Hospital Trust, NHS Trust, to court for dereliction of duty, basically. Now, I was there when one of the nurses was giving evidence. I do know that yesterday the man that calls himself Rose Henderson gave evidence, and as part of that evidence it says it never occurred to me that it would cause, I think the wording was, distress and unease to the other nurses in there. So he knew exactly what he was doing, and the nurses said he used to hang around for a prolonged period of time, looking and leering at them and saying, "Are you not going to get on? Are you not getting changed? Are you not getting changed?" And he used to wear boxer shorts, and he was questioned with holes in them so that they could see his genitalia. And he was questioned about, you know, if you're a female, why are you wearing boxer shorts? And he says, well, because I've got the genitalia that requires it. But the problem is, the problem is with this, the policies come top down, and then you get the managers that will just blindly follow policy, and it doesn't affect them. They're sat in, you know, they don't have to get changed at work. They're just sat tapping on the keyboard and writing these policies. And a lot of these are the students, just like in the fire service that wrote the appearance policy. They've been students who've gone through this critical theory and queer theory, and then they're writing policies for institutions, and they're also implementing those policies. So these middle managers, it doesn't matter to them. So this is why I call it the long march through the institutions. What's happening? Yeah. I didn't come up with that term. It's a well-known phrase. I think it's Antonio Gramsci or one of his students that came up with it. Yeah. And he said, how do you fundamentally change a society without a revolution, you know, and spilling blood? Well, what you have to do is get into the institutions, and it's going to be a long march through the institutions. It's going to take a long time. So basically, how do they do it? You get all this ideology through critical theory and queer theory into the universities. The academics will talk all about it. You know, they will poison the minds of the students. And if the students are looking up at, they look up to professors and they're telling them these theories about life, and you've got these young people that haven't much life experience, they're going to believe what the professors are saying. And then they write up about that. They go out then into the workplace, and then they implement all these policies. And that's what happened in the fire service, and it's obviously what's happening in the universities now. And you can see that they get, in the universities, they get tenure for life if they push these theories. And none of the management want to go against. COVID was the great experiment, wasn't it? COVID was what do they call it? Do they call it the beta test? So it showed that, people will follow orders through the chain of command in their employment. It was coming down through the chain of command, and they realised that if somebody stepped out of line on what was coming down, then you're going to lose your job. It happened with me in the fire service. So they realise that this power structure runs all the way through the workforce and all these institutions, and it silences people. This is why I say it's a war on freedom of speech, because people can't speak out about it. Those Darlington nurses chose to speak out about it. and now they're going through a court. Well, they went through a lot of trouble. They've actually taken this court case against their employer, but they were under the cosh from the Darlington NHS Trust. The union wouldn't represent them because the unions have been captured. They had to start up their own union called the Darlington Nurses Union. They've got an account on X as well, so people can follow that as well to see what's happening in the trial. But it just showed you that this orthodoxy coming down, if your livelihood is dependent on you, you putting food on the table and a roof over your head is dependent on you continuing to work for whatever employer you have or whatever institution you're working for, you have to toe the line. Even if you don't believe it, you have to just shut up and do as you're told, or you're going to face problems. I faced it in the fire service. The Darlington nurses faced it. Other people have faced it. You did as well, didn't you, Diane, in the libraries?
Yeah.
So a lot of people just shut up.
Yeah, and unfortunately for me, I just, I want to hear from you today, but just to say shortly that it was such an intense experience for me, and it all happened so quickly before I even realized it, that I, in the beginning, didn't even know that I was saying anything wrong. And, actually the first thing, we're talking about critical theory, so we're talking largely about gender and the trans issues today, but one of the first things that happened to me was when I was at a librarian conference, and I was placed on a panel at Cambridge. The conference took place at Cambridge, and the panel was about, the act of referencing and citing your sources when you're at university and you write a paper and you have to cite your sources. And the panel discussion was about whether or not that was a racist, oppressive practice. Because if you bring in students from other backgrounds to a British university, and we're applying our standards that we have in these universities here in the UK, and they're expected to follow those standards to write their paper, that might be oppressive to international students from different backgrounds. And I was just there saying there's nothing racist or oppressive about it. You're being respectful to people that wrote things that have already been written. You want to give them credit, and you want to help future people who might be reading that work find the previous sources. And so you're helping people in the future. You're being respectful of the people that wrote things before you, and there's nothing racist about it. But that, along with some issues around identity politics language, which I won't get into, led me to get a letter from the conference chair the following week saying I had broken the conference code of conduct. And it started from there. And I've always been so, I guess, practical, because librarianship is, to me, a very practical, hands-on profession. We don't need theory. We don't need ideology necessarily to help people find what they need. And I didn't even know this stuff even existed until I started to get into trouble for it. I didn't know that there was a line I was supposed to toe. I was just using my head and just common sense. Part of what we do in academic work is we cite our sources, and we teach students how to do that. And I had no idea I was being racist. It's just amazing how this stuff for me came out of nowhere. And as well, I guess with COVID was, as you said, and I've been thinking that more and more that was a test case now for all the stuff, and for the digital ID and everything else that we're now fighting. Because again, I didn't think that there was, I didn't realize the time that we were supposed to be so serious about it, that nobody in the university system where I was working, and I'm sure this is true of any university, I was the only one that I knew at the time, and I actually didn't say anything because that was so big. I was afraid to say anything, but in the back of my mind, I was going, this doesn't even make any sense that we're just being told to shut everything down. At the time in March 2020, it was 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever they said, to flatten the curve, so to speak. But I remember crying because I was so used to being on campus and being with students and going in and trying to figure out how I was going to do my job from home, which sounded at the time ridiculous. But nobody seemed bothered. They just did it. The first interview I ever did with Brian Garish, my Gutsy Women interview from, when I first started working with the column, I talked about that. And he asked me, did nobody else question it? I said, no. People just did what they were told. And then by the time we were on Zoom calls and they were wearing masks at home because their husband had a sore throat and they were afraid they would spread COVID around the house. And then it morphed into, well, I got one Pfizer and one Moderna, or I got two AstraZenecas or whatever. And I just stayed quiet, just thinking, I nothing to say here. So I think you're right that this has led to where we are now, at least. And that's just me talking from a university perspective, as I was a full professor when I was kicked out of the system, and the union wouldn't help me because they told me that they did not support transphobia. And I said, I'm not afraid of anyone. I just don't think that this is a good thing to be doing to people and putting it in front of children. But that was, so I couldn't get proper support from a union reps either by the time I left the system. So just to add to your examples, I've lived this
all been
myself.
Captured.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, all
absolutely.
the unions have been captured too. Yeah.
And that's what I've seen here when I've gone to some of these local events and sort of protests in Newcastles and things that I've covered for the column, is that a lot of the people on that side of things tend to be the university students, the ones with the septum piercing and the blue hair and the massive glasses and the bad, like they have a look, right? Yeah. I shouldn't say absolutely. That. They do. They have a look. I spot them a mile off.
I spot them a mile off when I'm out on the streets. They do. Do you know what as well? It took me a while to figure this out, but I was getting a lot of grief off older people. Not a lot of grief. I was getting some grief, quite ferocious grief, off older people. So I'm talking about people old enough to be grandparents, and they would come and shout at me, sometimes in hysterics. But they wouldn't stay around that long. They would shout at me, give me some abuse and then go, and these are kind of like, I'm talking about, 60-year-old women. And I'm thinking, what is going on there? But it struck me after a while, these are the grandparents of young children that are identifying as trans. And what's happened is the parents have affirmed the child's delusion, and then they've said to the grandparents, little Johnny is now little Julie, or little Julie is now little Johnny, and you have to you cannot say their old name. You cannot say that they're a boy, they're now a girl. Okay, and if you don't, you will not have a relationship with them. So they know that it's not true, but they have to go along with it, and they've been conditioned to go along with it for a period of time. And then, of course, when they see me with a sign which says there's no such thing as a transgender child, they know that it's true, but they can't believe, they're not allowing themselves to believe that, so they turn all their anger on me. Many times that happens.
I think that's a good thing for us to talk about here is your experiences being on the streets, because I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was shortly after Cheltenham when you started to go out with these sandwich boards, and I started seeing you, and you were in Manchester, and so I started following all of these things. So, I mean, you've got so many stories because I've watched so many of them, and you just watch in disbelief. For me, it doesn't seem to ever get to where it just kind of seems normal, because I can't just the behaviors that you get from just going out and standing on the street. So I'm not sure where you would like to start with that, because I know you have a lot of experiences.
So I started to get nasty verbal abuse from the very first time I went out, which was in Manchester. And you get people trying to grab your camera and throw it on the floor, or they knock my hat off. The first time I had people punch me in the chest, but I've got the board there. People that walk past me and shoulder barge me, and then run off like a coward or walk off as if nothing's happened or it was an accident. But it wasn't until I went to Liverpool, Bold Street, Liverpool. I won't swear, but this, who I would refer to as a trans rights activist, young woman, although because you said they have a kind of look, I couldn't tell whether it was a woman or a man. But she actually identified as a lesbian, I think. But she came up and she said, "Excuse me, go F yourself," and then disappeared. And I went, and I looked at the camera and they always get so angry. And she went off. 10 minutes later, she came back and she'd gone and bought a bottle of hot chili sauce, a big one like you get in the restaurants, and she'd taken the top off and she come running at me, squirting it, you know, all over me. I was using my boards to deflect it. She lifted the bottom of the board up, tried to get me in the face with it. And then she come running, swinging for me. I'm kind of like circling around and backing off. So I was covered in this hot chili sauce. So it's the first time it happened. It was kind of like, I was like, shit, what do I do now? But I grabbed hold, she had a backpack on, so I grabbed hold of it and I said, "I'm making a citizen's arrest of you." There was some guy who I was speaking with at the time, tried to allow her to make an escape because we disagreed. We were having a respectful conversation, but this is what I've realised. If I get attacked, people will side with my attacker if they disagree with me. That's happened time and time again, and they'll laugh. You know, we can be having a respectful conversation, but they always side with the attacker. He tried to get her to go away. I said, "You're not going away. I'm making a citizen's arrest." And I knew I was compromised because I was holding a backpack like this. So, and she had her hands free, and then she just got her arms and smacked me in the face. So I got hit here and here. The police have seen all that footage, okay, of me getting covered in this, getting hit in the face. I got an email off them just a few weeks back saying the police decision maker has issued a conditional caution. And the condition is that she pays my dry cleaning bill and goes on, I think, an anger management course. So you do get what's called a victim's right to review. So it's not even gone to the Crown Prosecution Service. This is how captured the police are now and how they're able to keep their crime figures down. Rather than put it to the police decision maker, they've just said, "All right, nothing to see here. We'll give them a caution. All right, and that's all been dealt with." Same with it happened. I got covered in syrup in Chester. That person only got what was called a community resolution, not even a caution. So not even a police record or anything. So that was there. Let me go to Brighton. I've got a court case coming up on the 26th of January next year for Brighton. So Brighton was quite an event. It's a good video, which you can see on my YouTube channel still. So the trans rights activists and Antifa came for me. So I was there on my own in Brighton, outside Brighton Pier. Initially, two youngsters, I'd call them, in balaclavas. I don't know what age they were, late teens, early 20s, in balaclavas. I wouldn't say trying to intimidate. Well, they were trying to intimidate me because they were getting in front of me, pushing me out of the way. They'd made their own signs up. But that was just the start. There were eventually, and the cavalry turned up as well to join them. And there's probably about 6 or 7 of them surrounding me, all covered up, all the faces covered up. They were jostling me, pushing me around, covering my face with the flags, wouldn't let me go. And then they come and covered me in soup. This intimidation lasted for about 20 minutes, at least 20 minutes non-stop. And I was saying to the members of the public, "Can you call the police?" Which they did, but the police just wouldn't turn up. They just didn't turn up. And I don't know how many calls, but a significant number of people called the police until they eventually turned up. And they almost let them get away. So, and I was saying, "It's that one there, it's that one there." And eventually they did arrest 2 of the people. One of them has been charged again. I've got to give evidence via a video link. I don't have to go down to Brighton. That is on the 26th of, did I say January? Yeah, 26th of January next year. But after once those two people had got arrested, the others had disappeared. At least I thought. The police said to me, "We can't leave because we've got a duty of care for you until you're safely away from this area." I said, "But even if I walk away, people could follow me." But anyway, they didn't even hang around. The police just drove off. So I was there. A large crowd had gathered outside Brighton Pier. A lot of people were supporting me because they saw how I'd been treated. And I needed to walk down towards my vehicle, which was half a mile down Brighton seafront. And this fantastic lady came with me. She was supporting me. And we're having a chat all the way down there. But what I always do is I leave my cameras running. I have a camera on my chest and I have a camera on a selfie stick, which points behind me, and I walk down Brighton seafront for half a mile. I'm quite cautious, so because I realise people are out to get me and they're going to follow me, so I stopped some distance before my vehicle. And I said to this lady, I said, "Right, let's just hang around here and see if we're being followed." And we turned around and we saw this guy, and she went, "Him there." And I'd recognised him from before. And I'd looked back through all the videos after this and seen him hanging around while I was at the pier. And he followed us for half a mile down Brighton seafront. So I just, I'm not going to shy away. I just walked straight over to him. He's like about 6'2", 6'3". I'm like 5'5". This big guy. And I said, "Are you following us?" And he went, "Yes." He said, "I'm making sure you leave Brighton. The police told you to leave, and I'm making sure you're going to leave." And then he starts to complain that I'm filming. And he goes, "Don't you dare film me." He said, "I'm here to make sure you leave Brighton." And then I'd left my sandwich boards propped up against the lamppost, and he walked over to them, picked them up, and started walking off. And I'm calling the police again at this time, saying I've been robbed. And this guy, and I'm following him, and then he starts running. It's so funny. He's running down Brighton seafront, and I'm saying to him, I said, I said, "It's not a good idea. Don't take my property." He goes up the steps, because I don't know if you know Brighton, the seafront's down here, and then there's a promenade higher up. He's about 30 metres steps going up. And I'm chasing him up the steps. I've got a phone in one hand, trying to call the police, my camera in the other. I'm trying to pull my boards off him. Couldn't get them off him. We get to the top. And I said to him, "Mate, this isn't a good idea." And he said, "Why not?" as he's running away. And I already decided by this point what I'm going to do. So he's, making a quick getaway. I've got my camera on a tripod. I put my camera down, put my phone in a pocket. I run to him, and I literally rugby tackle him to the floor. And I have to hold him on the floor, until he kind of learned his lesson. And I got my, members of the public turned up. Who then started siding with this guy because he's shouting, he's a transphobe, he's got anti-trans signs, he said, and some kids have covered him in soup. He's come he thought I was from Crawley because this lady was from Crawley. He's come all the way down from Crawley to spread hate in Brighton. So these other members of the public walking past start siding with this guy, and I've got him on the floor. And I said, I'm not going to let him up because he's like 6'4", 6'2", 6'3", and if he gets up, he's probably going to start swinging for me. But so I'm holding him down on the floor, and then he says, or the member of the public says, well, if you get your signs, walk away. We'll leave it at that. And this guy on the floor who's screaming because I've got him in a tight hold. He says, "Okay, that's a good deal. That's a good deal. Take your signs and go." So I just picked my signs up and walked off.
Wow.
So that's the kind of scrapes that I get into.
Yeah. And the the hypocrisy of it all to me is that these are the people telling us to be kind and inclusive, and then they're the ones that are ending careers and, you know, reporting people for hate crime or hate speech, whatever they want. Yeah. And these are the people that are coming after us when really we're just all trying to mind our own business. I mean, and then they're coming after us.
Yes, and all of a sudden, this guy that stole my property, and I tackle him to the floor because he didn't just take them. He said, "These are mine now." You know, so that's the intent to keep them. So as soon as I took him to the floor, he immediately became the victim. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this to me? You know, it's not right. It's, you know, the mind boggles. So he was the aggressor. He'd stalked me for half a mile with the intent to, I don't know, to deprive me of my property or whatever, you know. And when the tables are turned, he immediately became the victim.
Of course, that seems to be a pattern. Yeah. Unfortunately, we only have a few minutes left, and I do have a couple of things that I wanted to end up with. So take your time and talk about these things, because I think, you know, we've seen these on the ground examples. We've talked about a variety of things, how you got into this, but, you know, this is something that we cover frequently on UK Column because there is this bigger agenda at play. And I would just like to hear from you what you know about it, because you've become such a, you know, have a lot of, unfortunately for you, I guess, a lot of specialist knowledge on this topic. So who's pushing this and why are they pushing it? I think this is really important for parents and grandparents to understand.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's different, just the same with COVID, you've got different levels, I think, of power and competing interests. It is being pushed by the pharmaceutical industry, you know, definitely that. There are certain billionaires that are pushing this agenda. One of them is called Martin Rothblatt. Okay, used to be Martin Rothblatt, now Martin Rothblatt, who is heavily invested in technology. He also runs the biggest, he calls it pig farm with a P. Okay, he's got the biggest pig breeding business or facility in the world, where he's looking at implanting pig organs into people. But he wrote this book called From Transgender to Transhumanism. And he talks about, and you can see his videos on YouTube, he talks about one day you can live your life as an avatar on a server. We'll be able to download your consciousness and you can live as whatever avatar you want forever. Okay, so you'll have no need for your body. So that's got to be directly linked to a depopulation agenda. For me, that couldn't be quite any clearer. So he's one of these billionaires. You've got another one called Jennifer Pritzker. So his family run the Hyatt hotel chain, predominantly in America, but I think they're worldwide. So he used to be called Jonathan Pritzker. So he, for me, again, these two men are autogynephiles. That they've got, they get a sexual fetish of imagining themselves as a woman. So Jennifer Pritzker is funding a lot of the universities. So when we talked about critical theory, queer theory, this kind of thing, and LGBT, he's funding a lot of these university courses. So that's just two billionaires I know of, and they're heavily invested as well in the pharmaceutical industry. As well, there's an insurance company called Kaiser Permanente. Okay, now we talked a little bit about a medical, you know, it's a psychological diagnosis which requires, you know, kind of like physical treatment, you know, so you go from your puberty blockers, you go to your cross-sex hormones, and then the scalpel. You need, what you need is a code to pay for this surgery or to be given this medication, and it's in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is, it's like the Bible for the American Psychiatric Association. And what you do, you've got gender dysphoria. It used to be gender identity disorder. You've got gender dysphoria. And if you can diagnose that, you've got a code. And you can then give that code to the Kaiser Permanente, which is the biggest insurance company doing this. Okay. And they're invested in the medical industry too. So it's like a circular thing. So the money comes in from the people that are paying your policies. It goes to Kaiser Permanente. They then they're pushing all this in the schools and the colleges too, but then they get that diagnosis, they get a code, and then they can pay for the drugs and the surgery which Kaiser Permanente are invested in. So it's a whole money-making racket. Did that make sense? Did I make that clear enough?
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, I've looked at other aspects of this as well with Professor Gloria Moss, for example, who's, you know, we've looked into the transhumanism agenda, which is also tied into globalist organizations, World Economic Forum, United Nations, the World Health Organization, that has said, you know, these are things I'm interested in, is how is this getting into education, right? In my background as an educator, which is, well, they're now saying globalist policy dictates that children are sexual beings from birth, and that the UN Commission of the Rights of the Child says, well, children can make their own choices about what they do. So that means if they want to decide to change their gender, if they decide that they want to sleep with an adult, they can. Those are rights that they have, which to me opens its way into pedophilia and other really dangerous things as well. So I think there's so many things.
Yeah, of course, I missed those out.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about the pharmaceutical industry. I get so angry about the other ones that I forget about the money-making scheme, which is obviously, you're right, customers for life. It's absolutely, So you got the big. Let me just put in there 1 second there. You got the big foundations like the Open Society Foundation from George Soros, and he funds the NGOs, and the NGOs write the papers, and then they push this through the World Health Organization. And then that goes into the education system, and then you've got through the World Economic Forum, which you've got all the partners. The strategic partners and the partners are all the big corporations, and that's how it's pushed into the policies of the private workplace. Absolutely right. And so we can see how it comes down, and I think, you know, sometimes it's easy to want to blame individual educators or librarians or, you know, but ultimately they're mostly interested in, you know, can I pay my mortgage? Well, like, can I feed myself? Can I keep my job? And so they lose track of what we really should be worrying about and sort of watching for their own needs, which I completely understand, having lost my income before I landed with UK Column. I completely understand that. But it is something that we need to be aware of. And I guess, you know, there's a couple of things that I want to ask you about, just because when I cover things that are this stressful, traumatic to hear about, honestly, I like to give people something, you know, well, what can I do? Right. So I think there's two sides of it. Is, you know, what can parents and families do that care about the children who are being exposed to this in the schools, which of course is my interest as an educator and a librarian, but also, and I guess the bigger question is, because so many people are now working for employers, because there's so many employers that are captured, regardless of what, like you said, that I didn't really know the fire service was captured. Like, that's pretty, that shouldn't matter, right? You should just be, fire, police, basic services should not be captured with ideology. Like, why? You just want to save people's lives in their houses, right? So what in your opinion, what can we do? What, not me as a journalist, but what can the public do if they see that this is happening?
Yeah, it's really difficult if your employment rests on you towing the line. It's really difficult to speak out. I'd say you've got to kind of like find your voice. That's the advice that I was given. You know, I didn't mention this. I went to a festival in 2024, Jam for Freedom, and Kelly J. Keane was speaking there, and I asked her that very same question. She said, find your voice. If you're a parent, go to the school and demand to know what you're teaching your kids. And what Kelly J. Keane experienced was that they wouldn't take her seriously as a woman.
Of course.
So she said, fathers, you need to go, you know, because the school will listen to you. That was Kelly J. Keane saying that. So as a parent with kids in school, demand to know what the teachers are teaching your children. If you do have children that are identifying as being as the opposite gender, I would point you towards the organisation I mentioned earlier called genspect.org. Okay, check them out, and you can, once you see there's a whole list of resources there. Okay, check them. There's another organisation I come across called Our Duty as well, and it was an organisation of parents that have trans-identifying children that have come together. So that's another one to look at. But the big international organisation fighting this is GenSpect. They've got other sister organisations. One of them is called Beyond Trans, which was a group of psychotherapists that would not immediately affirm the child's delusion in the gender. They would explore why they're having these thoughts or feelings. Often it's that they've been groomed online on social media.
Right. No, I can see that.
So
it makes sense.
Definitely genspect.org, definitely.
Okay. All right, I will put a link to that as well in the write-up for the interview, so people can just
check out Our Duty. I can't remember, it was Our Duty group, ourduty.group, but you'll be able to search it.
Okay, thank you. I'll have people can search that, or if they're watching it on YouTube, they don't typically see our write-ups and links. But if they're on the UK Column website, then we can link to it. Last question I always ask everybody is there anything else that you would like to say that we haven't covered so far today?
Oh God, I pretty much think that we've covered it all. But what I would say, this is just one topic that I'm focusing on. I do like to focus on other things as well. I suppose I am a bit of an activist, but I think one of the most compelling or important issues that we're facing at the moment is the digital ID, which is going through. And I think it's this agenda, what I'm fighting against, and the digital ID, it's all coming from the same top globalist people. So I think we need to spread awareness of that. I really do, and along with of how it ties into central bank digital currencies as well, because a lot of the general public aren't as awake as the UK Column audience. So I think everybody that's watching this, that follow UK Column, your main audience, a lot of them are actually older people that watch it, so they might be in a position to speak out because they may be retired, so they don't have paymasters. So what I would say to those people as well is find your voice, talk about these issues. If you haven't got a paymaster, okay, then you're free to speak. I have some great conversations on the street with people who are who are backing me. They can't speak out, so I don't put the videos out on YouTube or on social media because they're afraid of losing the job. But I speak to people, and they speak to me in confidence, in private. So go out. Not everybody's going to throw soup or chili sauce over you if you're having these conversations. But I talk about the trans agenda, but it's a really good opportunity for me to reach people and talk about other agendas that you talk about on UK Column and what the UK Column, you know, audience know and the general public don't. So find your voice and speak to people.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think you're an inspiration for sure for a lot of people. You really are, and it's just been great to watch how your following has increased over the past few months, and I am sure it will continue to do so. So, thank you so much for your time with me today. It was really interesting to hear your own perspectives on what you've been doing, and I really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Diane. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. This has been Diane Rasmussen with UK Column talking with Steve James. And once again, you can be found on Edge of the Matrix on YouTube, on X, and on TikTok. So thank you for watching, and see you all again soon. Thank you.